You're watching BionicDance. Don't run on automatic, instead, please think.
There is an argument used against the existence of God that is by far the worst objection I've ever heard.
And your objection to this objection is not the worst objection I've ever heard. You're not that special. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers. BionicDance here. And yeah, it's inspiring philosophy again. I've been kind of avoiding the guy for a while because he can be a bit of a pretentious prig who's rather more full of himself than even I am, and that's saying something. But his idea of the worst argument against theism ever is rather bogglesome because in truth it's a rather pointed and unanswerable one. Check it out.
You won't find it used among professional philosophers, but instead, I tend to encounter it in great amounts online among laymen.
Right. Because you're not on the internet. And if you're not a layman yourself, you haven't exactly gone to great lengths to illustrate that fact. I've been to your YouTube, Facebook, and Google Plus pages, and there is not a scrap of information about your credentials. So, who wants to call shenanigans, nay, hypocrisy?
When theists argue from cosmological or contingency arguments that God created the universe, the worst reply a skeptic can make is,
who created God?
What created God?
If God did indeed have a beginning, by the simple logic of cause and effect, there had to be an agent, separate and apart from the effect, that caused it.
So then I want to know where God came from.
Who created God? Who created the person who created God? Who created the person who created the person who created God?
Design is dead, otherwise one must explain who designed the designer.
5 YouTubers and Richard Dawkins. You're not, like, trying to bias your viewers or anything. Perish the thought.
This, in my opinion, is by far the worst objection ever made by a skeptic.
Really? Well, case closed then, I suppose. Oh, wait.
Now, for those who may be wondering why this is such a bad objection, the basic reasoning is there is no thought put into it. Just because we can argue the universe was created, that doesn't mean we imply that everything needs a creator to exist.
No, perhaps not. But what you can't do is justify the reverse position. We're already expected to take God's existence on faith. We have no evidence that such a creature actually exists. And now you expect us to just accept the notion of an uncreated creator on the word of philosophers? Thank you, but I think we're going to need more than just abstract thought on this one. We are, after all, talking about the beginning and existence of the physical world, and that is the realm of scientific schools that deal in the empirical and the objective, like physics and astronomy. If we were to rely on philosophy alone, we could prove absolutely anything, provided we never had to show any actual evidence. The only reason we know that Darth Vader isn't real is because George Lucas freely admits that he made the guy up. But if that weren't the case, what reason would we have to suspect that Darth Vader does exist, that the Star Wars movies aren't dramatizations of events that took place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away? I challenge you to prove the truth or falsity of the stories told in those movies if you're not allowed to use the admission that they are indeed fiction as evidence. So why should we take the word of philosophers who never have to actually prove a damn thing? Logic alone does not do the heavy lifting of proving existence.
How the skeptic can make this leap is beyond me. No theist argues everything needs a creator. Look at the very simple Kalam cosmological argument. The first premise is not everything has a cause, but that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Obviously we're not implying everything has a creator, but only things that have a beginning.
And we have to take it on your say-so that God, A, does exist, and 2, didn't have a beginning. Details. We can skip right over that bit, right? Right? And if you're not implying that everything has a creator or everything has a beginning, then you're going to have to explain how that's possible. Show me evidence. Show me one thing, anything that doesn't have a beginning. And if you can't, then show me how you can justify saying that something did, in that it was a god. And that it was your God. You don't even have a hypothesis at this point. What you have is imagination. And I'll be the last person to say that imagination is a bad thing, right up until you start saying that it's real.
But just because you like something in a book doesn't mean you can have the thing you like in the book happen in real life. That's what crazy people want.
My favorite cosmological argument, the Leibnizian version, makes this distinction very clear. Anything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external explanation.
Right, everything has an explanation of its own existence. However, take a look at premise 2 in your favorite cosmological argument. The universe has an explanation for its existence, and that explanation is grounded in a necessary being. No, it isn't. That's one hell of a logical leap, one that desperately needs proving. First of all, I take exception to the term being. Even if it doesn't imply something along the lines of intelligent entity, it sure as hell manages to imply it. But I acknowledge that it may well be a derivative of the word be, as in something which is being, existing. Doesn't mean that it's not a horrible word choice, though. Second, there is no evidence that the universe isn't just one step in some sort of infinite progression, that whatever created the universe was itself created, and that also created, and so on into infinity. Even if that does eventually lead to some sort of godlike being, it's still a possibility you've left out. There is also no evidence that the universe did begin, as opposed to being caught in some sort of temporal loop-de-loop like a Mobius strip or a Ouroboros. There isn't any evidence that it is either, but it's begging the question to insist that the universe did in fact begin. Even with the Big Bang to look at, we may just be unable to see past it in time. Or unable to see past it yet. Think of all of the various things that humanity was unable to see or know until science caught up, and all of the truly fucked up explanations that were clung to until it did. Single-celled organisms, genetics, the speeds of both light and sound, the Earth going around the sun, and so on. Unless you're content to say that science has plateaued and there's nothing left to discover, which I am not, making claims about the origin of the universe beyond the Big Bang without scientific evidence is both foolish and fallacious.
So again, just because some things like the universe have an external cause, that doesn't mean everything that exists must also have a cause. God would be by definition of the first category, a being who doesn't need an external cause and is necessary.
Says you. It's more than possible that everything for which you claim God is responsible could have been caused by some other necessary force. So why should we take your word for it that God done it, much less exists in the first place?
Because of this, asking who created God is equivalent to asking what caused an uncaused thing. It simply is nonsensical.
Unless, of course, you're wrong that God is necessary. And unless I slip up because, unfortunately, I violated my own principle and have been running on automatic, I would never ask who created God. I would ask what created God, because to imply that there was an intelligence behind something coming into existence is, again, begging the question. And the same goes for asking how the universe came to be.
So when theists argue the universe has a cause or an explanation, we are saying this infers a substance or a being that would be the first cause and is uncreated and necessary, which we theists then argue would be who we call God.
And to whom you ascribe history, personality, magical powers, prophets, messiahs. Maybe if you were more like pantheists or deists, this would be less of a contentious issue. You'd have your little stories, the rest of us would think they were silly, and life would go on until somebody could prove something. But instead, you insist on trying to convert us all, be us atheists or theists from another faith, or at the very least passing laws to make us act like we have. And then there are the real extremists, the ones who think that technology is bad, or that medicine is sinful because God will heal us, or that sawing chunks off of people's naughty bits makes perfect sense. You don't see the more argumentative atheists going after Hindus, Wiccans, or pagans, do you? Know why? Because they're not always getting up in our faces and trying to make our lives worse. But so long as you lot are trying to make the world over in your own image, some of us are going to be doing our level best to show that believing in your God is chowder-headed, in the hopes that you might just shut up, go away, and leave us alone. And if the first cause in which you claim to believe were as benign and non-intrusive as a deistic god or some sort of pantheistic force of nature, the amount of a shit I would give wouldn't get too far past zero. So if you want to use the cosmological argument to prove that something caused the universe to come into existence, fine, I might even agree with you. Maybe. But once you start getting into bullshit about deities with personalities, like Yahweh, or Zeus, or Osiris, you're gonna have to start ponying up some data that the rest of us can check up on independently.
This is not special pleading since the first mover would be uncaused by definition.
But as I just said, it is indeed special pleading once you start assigning attributes to this first mover beyond being the first mover.
Look at it this way. The atheist philosopher David Hume said the universe was necessary. If you would have gone to David Hume and tried to refute his theory the universe was uncaused, by asking if the universe is the explanation of our existence, then what created the universe, he would have simply replied he stated the universe is necessary, and therefore didn't need a creator. Now I bring this up because when I've tried to point this out to skeptics in the past, they commonly reply by saying, if God doesn't need a creator, then why does the universe? Why can't we just say the universe is necessary? Well, this was a prevalent belief of atheists before the 20th century, but the observable data in cosmology and physics has strongly refuted this possibility. An overwhelming amount of evidence now shows our space-time is contingent and had a beginning, so it cannot be necessary in and of itself.
And as I said before, this assumes that science has plateaued and will never again discover anything paradigm-shifting that completely reshapes our understanding of the universe. In other words, begging the question.
Now, of course, we can have a conversation over what is the most likely cause of the universe, and I've argued the theistic case in more detail elsewhere. But the basic point is simply asking who created God is a ridiculous objection.
Oh, really? Well, let's have a look at the gods and goddesses of religions other than the Abrahamic, shall we? Horus is the son of Osiris and Isis. Wouldn't that mean he was kind of, created? Thor is the son of Odin. In fact, Odin seems to have fucked his way through most of the Norse pantheon. Do I even need to go into the procreative habits of the Greek and Roman gods? Sounds like gods get created all over the place. So what makes your god so damn special?
I'll leave you with the words of the atheist philosopher Michael Ruse, who responded to Richard Dawkins when he tried this objection.
We've all done it. We've all been there. And, it's a good question, but, it's not the end of the argument. Dawkins then triumphantly says, there you are, bad argument, let's move on.
But it is a bad argument, as I just spent the last several minutes trying to explain. It has more plot holes than a low-budget sci-fi flick. It makes more assumptions than your average conspiracy theorist. I don't know about moving on, necessarily. You should have a chance to go back and revise if you still think the argument has merit. But as is, it's a really shitty argument for the existence of a deity, much less yours.
The point is, Christians have got some grown-up responses to these sorts of things. And I think that Dawkins does a serious misservice to the cause of non-belief by not being prepared to take seriously the kinds of things that believers believe in.
Why should they be taken seriously when what they believe is fucking ludicrous and not supported by a scrap of evidence? When the claim is about existence and the argument is based entirely in belief rather than scientific data, what is there to be taken seriously? I don't care if their name has Saint at the front or PhD at the back. If their position on the existence of something has no more substance behind it than a child's game of pretend, taking it seriously does our integrity and self-respect a serious misservice. If you want to be taken seriously, then start acting seriously. And I'm spent. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please, think. If you don't like what I'm saying, there's a good chance you're the reason I'm saying it.